They were discovered in the 1950s, and they were the first uh, specific medicines to treat anxiety. And there's no question they do calm down people who are very anxious. The problem with benzodiazepines is that they don't deal with the underlying reasons for anxiety. So the analogy I used to use, and I've researched them for 40 years, I've lectured on them for a similar period. The analogy I use is that if you're very anxious, what benzodiazepines do is they're a bit like wallpaper. You've got a crack in your wall, and you've got your in-laws coming, and you want to impress them. You haven't got time to rebuild the wall, so you paper it over, and it looks good, and you can have you can show off that you've got a decent room and impress them. But the crack's not getting any smaller. In fact, it may be getting larger because you're not dealing with it. And that's the problem. So the big problem with benzos is not what they do, but what happens when you stop them. Because when you stop them, then many people go into withdrawal. And that is actually like being anxious. It's like what you had at the beginning, but often for some people worse. And that then means that they struggle to stop. So then they go back on them and they stay on them for a very long period. And so we don't use them except for things like jet lag or transient insomnia. We don't use them as first-line treatments to calm people now. We might use them as second or third line. But then there's one or two other angles to this which complicate things. I mean, so for instance, there are benzodiazepines which are life-saving if you've got having an epileptic fit. The standard treatment for an epileptic fit is a benzodiazepine. Without those, people will die. And then at the other extreme, you've got when people are having severe psychotic episodes and endanger themselves and others, then we give benzodiazepines to calm them down. And the reason we give them in those states of extreme medical emergency is because they are very safe. So unlike other sedatives, like alcohol or barbiturates or GHB or ketamine, it's almost impossible to stop breathing on them. They're actually some of the safest medicines we have. So it's difficult to say that it's come up with a single kind of number for benzodiazepines because they have such wide medical use. And then a couple of other things just to share, which I think which is for this audience is really important. So for people who are particularly people addicted to opiates, if they cannot get their opiate, then benzodiazepines are what they turn to tide them through the period of great misery when they're going into withdrawal. So there's a lot of benzodiazepine use alongside opiate use. And that has, unfortunately, again, that is a very divisive, it's a very divisive phenomenon because for some people, they can be life-saving because if you're going into severe withdrawal and you don't have a benzodiazepine, then you can become very, very, very exercise and very unhappy and actually do things that you'd later regret in order to get your opiate. But on the other hand, if you've got opiates on boards and with benzos don't stop you breathing by themselves. But if you take things like respiratory suppressants, like opiates in particular, on top of benzos, then they can. So it's a very complicated world there. And
Yes.
just, can I just say one or two other things? I mean, so maybe the question you should be asking here, maybe is not benzos, but people using benzos, non-medical benzo use. And that is becoming a serious problem. It's becoming a problem partly because the concern about medical benzo use led to many health authorities and doctors stopping using benzos. But because so many people who were dependent on other drugs, particularly opiates, were using benzos and were getting them prescribed successfully, they then had to get them on the black market. And the black market, in its inevitable fashion, decided to start selling stronger benzos. So people might have been on Valium, diazepam, from their GP or from their addiction specialist. They couldn't get that. So what the black market supplied was stronger drugs like alprazolam and then an even stronger drug called etizolam, which has never been licensed in Britain. And that is between 10 and 50 times stronger than Valium. And if you're taking that plus an opiate, then you are more likely to die because it's so much, it's like taking 50 Valiums instead of one. So now we have a lot of deaths from, particularly in Scotland, from etizolam because it's being used illegally in the black market because of the failure of the addiction services to properly provide cover for people who run out of opiates. So that's a long way about in saying, if it's very complicated. But you want me to put them in a spot, don't you?
No, well, we can get to that in a second. I mean, that was such a good coverage. I actually didn't know it had such broad spectrum application. I think what I had in my mind was that the most common use was for depression or anxiety disorders as a typical antidepressant. I think it's not mainline now, but some of these comments were just breaking my heart of people that were suffering some form of depression maybe 10 or 20 years ago when they were more first line, and now they're just suffering withdrawal basically permanently. So some of these, to read some of these comments, I'm shocked benzodiazepines weren't on here, considering it is factually one of, if not one of the hardest drugs to quit. Going cold turkey can kill, and post-acute withdrawal syndrome can make the withdrawals permanent. Another one said, this list has limited credibility without benzos. My benzo withdrawals made my opiate withdrawals look like my missed cup of coffee today headache. That one really blew me away. Yeah. Why are the withdrawal symptoms specifically with benzodiazepines so bad? Is this for people that were taking them over a long period of time, trying to medicate some level of anxiety or depression, and then maybe they had to escalate their dose because of that? Is that how they sort of fall into this?
You've got it, Evan.
This horrible cycle.
You've actually got it nail on the head there. So, for instance, when people put on benzodiazepines for epilepsy or for muscle spasm, and they were really good for muscle spasm, and they were kind of commonly used to help people with slip disc. When people are put on them for those problems, they tend not to get withdrawal symptoms. But people who put on them, particularly for anxiety, the receptor, there is a receptor in the brain for benzodiazepines called the benzodiazepine receptor. And that is set at different levels of functionality. And in anxious people, it's set low. And that's why, and benzos kind of restore that function. But over time, even though they don't particularly get tolerant, some do, but not many, over time, that receptor kind of loses its function even more. So when you stop the benzo, you're in a worse state than you were before. And that's why coming off is very difficult. So there's this interaction between the medicine and the person's sort of brain substrate for which they take the medicine. Yes. And just as a final thing here, I mean, a lot of my research, clinical research, has been trying to find alternatives to benzodiazepines. Because one of my earliest pieces of research was understanding what benzodiazepines do in the brain and how they do produce tolerance and how they change the receptor. And that's what I moved to medicines like SSRIs, which are actually obviously work in a very different way. They don't work quickly to relax you, but they do in time reduce anxiety disorders. And they're certainly, although they're not necessarily easy to get off, for most people they're not as problematic as benzos to come off.
Yeah. So what would someone need to be prescribed benzodiazepines today? Would it be a very resistant depression or a very severe anxiety disorder? I presume like first line might be SSRIs, try out a few typical sort of antidepressants. And then if they don't work, if they're resistant to that, would the benzodiazepines come in then?
Yeah, the most common use is for sleep, for sleep to help people sleep, where we usually recommend taking them just maybe 3 times a week so that you don't get tolerant, so that you don't change your brain. So you will know, you get a bad night, then you're going to take one and get a good night. So they're mostly used for that. They're used for anxiety, once you say what other treatments have failed, but they're often used as a sort of add-on. So, people can have them, and then if something, challenging is going to happen, like have to give a talk or something. I mean, one of my colleagues, who was very, very talented, brilliant scientist, he'd always take a small dose of Valium before he gave a public talk because he didn't want to stutter. They actually do relax you. So they have a kind of, sort of specialist kind of utility there, but we don't use them first line really for anxiety disorders, except in rare circumstances where you can use it intermittently.
Right. So all of these very varied use cases are going to make it hard for it to put on this tier list, and I feel like no matter where we put it, we're going to offend somebody. There's going to be an outrage in the comments, sort of no matter where we put this, because you made a lot of
Yes.
really good points there, that in some cases, for some people, it's life saving. For
Yeah.
some people, it can cripple them, and clearly, so many people in the comments, it's absolutely crippled them for
Yeah.
decades, and that's heartbreaking to hear.
Yeah.
Where do you think it goes in this sort of system?
Well, they have to go below alcohol. I mean, they do have to. I don't, because they are medicines. So we know that they have to go down below alcohol. You've so you've so I think they have to be C, to be honest with you, not B.
Okay, but more harmful. So we have MDMA and cannabis in C. So we're going to put them more harmful, because we
Oh,
can put them in B, but
there's
we
a
can put them
ranking
in
there as
B.
well.
And it's, yes,
Yeah, I put them at
so
the
we
top
can
of. You can put them at the top of C. They are
put them in
probably
the
at the
top
top.
of C.
They certainly cause. There are more benzodiazepine related deaths than there are MDMA or cannabis deaths. Definitely.
Okay, I can see the comment section erupting already, but we gotta we gotta put it somewhere.
You have.
Yes, yes, I do. I'll take the blame. I'll take the blame. I forced David Nutt to do this. He doesn't want to. Let's go to the next.
The Giant Shoulder mission is to explore radical ideas in biology, neuroscience, and consciousness, and elevate those stories to the highest possible level while keeping them accessible to everyone. If this interests you and you want to support independent science, then please consider subscribing to the Clips channel. Check out our 26 Neuroscience book. You can download it for free